Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host at Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States. On this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, an increasingly divisive and turbulent world politically, economically, as we're in the middle of a global recession, continued inflation, gas prices, and the massive gun shootings in America with 2 shootings in California in the last 3 days. Vice President Harris is on her way to California. She was supposed to speak here in North Carolina tomorrow. And we are just really praying for America and for California and for the victims of this violence. Today, I want to base my monologue on just some insights from a summit I attended this week in North Carolina, last week, called the North Carolina Transportation Summit. And the title of the program was called Vision to Reality at the Speed of Change. Now, we've talked about infrastructure a lot on the show, to the extent of the massive amounts of money that are coming in to North Carolina and to other states with ARP money for building roads and bridges to the tune of billions of dollars coming to North Carolina. But we're really surprised to see the disarray and the absolute dismal situation that our Department of Transportation has been in over the last few years. Before COVID, the Department of Transportation, because of declining gas revenues, that's how North Carolina makes money, gas and vehicle tag fees, was down by $320 million. And that budget deficit grew over the years. Eventually, North Carolina's transportation fund was $1 billion short. And during the conference, Dale Folwell, our state treasurer, had good news to report during a funding formula, the future of funding transportation in North Carolina panel, where he presented Secretary Eric Boyette, the DOT secretary, a $1.1 billion check as the funds had been replenished through measures taken by the General Assembly, more stringent oversight. And now the legislature is looking at taxing or coming up with better fees to fund the Department of Transportation. The reasoning behind my monologue is simply this. As we push for more electric cars and more of these cars driving on the roads, the problem is if we don't charge as much of a fee as we do those driven by gas, the revenues are going to continue to decline. And as we know, cars are becoming more fuel efficient. Many of the car manufacturers are saying that they're going to go all electric by 2030, 2040, sometimes even sooner. And what is that going to mean to a state like North Carolina, which is a perfect example, and the 8th largest state in the country? In Wake County, where I live, 1 million people predicted to live here in the next 15 years, and millions of people predicted to come to North Carolina. So this is going to be a challenge. And I think my final point is this. As we look at infrastructure challenges in America, we have to look at the speed of the investment of the infrastructure. It's not enough just getting the money. I remind all of us that when Roosevelt was in the White House, Franklin D. Roosevelt, we were building bridges and roads faster. We modernized 1,000 airports. The cost of construction was obviously much lower, but we were spending about 3% of our GDP on infrastructure, research, and development. I think this is critically important for the future of the United States. It's not just how much money we can brag about that's coming in. It's how quickly we can put that money to work, how quickly we can put that funding and revenue in action so we can see results, which in this case is wider roads, updated bridges, more transit and light rail and commuter rail, which is also being hailed as an absolute must in states like North Carolina. We're going to talk about this, the gun shootings in California, George Santos' continued lies and now allegations of Ponzi schemes and everything, and then set the stage at the table to talk about whatever esteemed panel. But transportation is on the move. Transportation is important because we got to move from one place to the other if we're going to keep the economy moving. Now let's get started. We have with us today Mark Lee.
How you doing, Steve? Glad to be here. We've also got Lee Newton Rhodes with us, and I think Shaquille may be joining us in a minute or two, and all in that space. And you're right about transportation being very important. Had the pleasure yesterday of talking to Lisa Kim on one of our shows, and she is a former Republican politician for Maryland, and she was actually talking about the transportation that she had helped initiate there in the Maryland area. I think she said it was the Purple Line because apparently they do a lot of stuff color coded in that area. So she was actually a proponent of that particular notion of public transportation, and that was actually coming from the Republican side. So it does seem to be an issue that a lot of folks are very much interested in on both sides of the aisle and all in that kind of space. And I don't know if you know this, but I did have a question for you and Lee based on an article that I saw recently. And I know that sometimes you talk about business and business notions and everything, but apparently there was a recent poll out that said that despite what some of the business owners are saying, wanting people to come back to work and everything, that the hybrid work has made people more productive. And that was actually a recent survey that I saw, and all of that because a lot of people are spending time and a little bit more time being productive at home while they're working from home. Sometimes they're being productive on a second job, and I don't know how the corporations might feel about that part of it, but they are being productive. And one of the benefits that they said was, guess what? Less transportation. Because if you're working from home, you don't have to do as much in that commute time and all in that space. So, Lee, I don't know if you got any thoughts about that, but it was an article, and an interesting article that I read yesterday, because they were talking about how some of the people are using their time. Some of it is for, like I said, other jobs. Sometimes it's for other things that they need to do at home. Apparently, a lot of the women were using the extra time, at least a proportion of the time, for childcare or things in that space. So they were using it for some of the home maintenance things that you need to do in a home as well, including sometimes taking care of the children. I think that if the children were under 14, it was 1%, like, and they were not significant percentages. It might have been 0.7 versus 2.3% of the time if they were under 14 or over 14. So of course, if they're teenagers, you're going to spend less time with the kids and all in that space. But it was just an interesting article that I found, and I don't know if Shaquille.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah, it's a game changer for workers. It's really nice. But how are they measuring productivity?
That's a good question. I was getting the impression that they were trying to find out, what people were doing, how their work was being arranged, and what kind of things that they were doing. I'm sure that because like even one of the jobs that I have, and actually I'll be starting back on that on tomorrow, not tomorrow, next week and everything, but it is the testing company that I work for and all in that space. And that's actually one of the things that we are measured on every day. We get a nice little report. It's one of them lovely internet reports that says that you are either being, whatever the production rate is, of average, above average, and things in
No,
that space.
I don't know what metrics. Yeah, I don't know what metrics they're using. But like call centers, it's very easy to monitor, their productivity.
Right.
But other things where you're thinking a lot, and there's no interaction between you and a screen, it's very difficult to monitor, what the person's doing when they're not interacting.
Yeah, and let me take a stab at that. I want to real quickly, and I want to get back to.
Can I just say something just real quick to Mark's open? It's quite interesting, isn't it, that females, according to you, the women are spending time, with their children. I thought that women didn't want to do that. Well, isn't that what we've been told? Is that what's been rammed down our throats all this time? That women don't want to spend time with their kids; they'd rather be at work and have the kids in childcare.
Well, like I said, that was an interesting article that I found and everything, and that was definitely, but the percentage was actually relatively low. I think it was like 2% versus 0.5 or something like that. And I've tried.
Shaquille, what Mark didn't say is men do not want to spend time with their children. That's what, if you read in between the lines.
Maybe that's what I like it. Sorry, Steve, I cut in there. You wanted to say something.
Well, I want to get into real quickly transportation, and I'm going to close out on my monologue today with my insight about productivity and shifting away from a virtual world, because I've had some experiences recently which I want to share with all of you about what I think about the nature of work and how we measure productivity. But back to transportation, I think it's I wasn't as prepared today with numbers, but the bottom line is that this is a real crisis in North Carolina, and I'm sure many states around the country in the United States are facing lack of transportation funding. And so this is a huge issue, I think, affecting America. And I really, I think I'm going to agree with Shaquille Latimer on this point, is that, my concern is that there's so much money coming in but nobody knows how quickly that money is going in. And, all this ARP money, are we going to see results of this in the next 2, 3, 4 years? Or is it going to be like Obama stimulus programs where I know there was a project that took 9 years to get shovel ready from when the money come down? So, I just want to ask the panel, how does America deal with that transportation?
Steve?
Well,
that's part of the problem. I'm sorry, Shaquille, real quickly. The other problem is if the Americans listen to the government, less money is going to be coming in, because if people switch to electric vehicles, gas revenue and gas taxes is going to decrease tremendously, and then they're going to have to find some other source for those funds. Shaquille?
Sorry, I'm messaging Seth. Look, I just want to let's address a couple of things. So in your open, you talked about taxes on electric vehicles because tax revenue is falling, and so they want to tax electric vehicles more highly, and they're going to use that money for this or that purpose. And they always do that when they talk about taxes. They always talk about we're going to use these tax dollars for this particular purpose. But it's interesting because when the taxpayer says, hey, X percentage of my tax dollars is going to people on Social Security that aren't working, who are able to work, the government says, well, you can't actually say that, $400 out of your paycheck is going towards that because it's actually just going to one big kitty and we're spending it on all these different things. So I think that that's disingenuous when the government and politicians say that, Steve. But more importantly, I think when it comes to both transportation and the other thing, bringing manufacturing back to the United States, America has to be realistic that this is going to put upward pressure on inflation. Now, bringing manufacturing back to the United States, I would say, is a very good thing for the United States to do, but people have to be aware that that will cause some level of inflation. In relation to how do you build roads and bridges and, fund all of that and actually get the stuff done. I know that Democrats and most Americans, even Republicans, like to give FDR a lot of credit for that, but he didn't have to do what he did. And there wasn't really that much of a call for it. It made sense to do it because it was relatively cheap with really high rates of unemployment at the time. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that's what the government should always be doing. I think America would be better off entering into public-private partnerships agreements, giving private investor groups, some rapid tax incentives and things like that. They'll build these things. They'll get it done. Get government out of the way, make sure the regulations aren't so difficult, and then you can actually build train lines. You can build the infrastructure for high-speed rail. At the moment, it's not just the high cost, it's why the high cost exists. Nobody can convince me that the reason why it's costing $700 million a mile in the United States and it's only costing 200 and 300 million a mile in similarly wealthy countries like Germany and France to build rails. Nobody can convince me that's because of the United States being a more expensive country. The reason why is because of government regulations. So if the government can get out of private enterprise's way and make the right sort of deals, that would be a good opportunity. And users are going to pay for that. It's going to be more fair. You could see American pension funds, for example, and of course international investors will invest as well. But you could see pension funds investing in this type of infrastructure and getting a return for people that are going to rely on that income and that growth later on in their lives. That to me would make more sense than soaking the taxpayer now for something that you're basically going to give away. So I think that's important. I think that's a really important distinction. And again, look at what they do in other countries. Look at the UAE, where you can go and build a private road. You make your money back. You make a profit for say 20 years or 30 years, and then the road becomes the public's property. You've made your money. You're out. There is a whole heap of different ways that you can work with private enterprise to achieve these goals without government being there, and I think that's going to cause a problem if you go down that path.
Yeah, Shaquille, I'm glad that you actually mentioned that because that's actually one of the things that Lisa Kim was talking about. And like I said, she was at the forefront of the line there in Maryland, and she did mention the fact that a lot of the admiration that she had for people that were doing it successfully were actually from other countries. And of course, she, as many people have said, considers America to be the greatest country out there in the world and everything. But she definitely did see that there were some ways that other countries were doing it better. And part of it was what you just said, which is they might not have been following the same bureaucratic problems that we have a tendency to do here and everything in that space. And I was actually going to bring up another bureaucratic problem because I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about
Well, just before you change the topic, I just want to let me just say, Australia has, especially across the east coast of Australia, we have a lot of private toll roads. Now, I don't agree with the way that these private toll roads are operating. I think that it's been an incredibly unfair thing for the taxpayer. So there has to be a balance. Unfortunately, if you enter into PPP agreements, the government and politicians are going to be, subject to lobbying by special interest groups, and you end up in the same sort of issue where everyone's just out for themselves. I think that people need to sit down and have proper conversations about how to fix these things. And just before you go on to the other bureaucratic stuff, Steve, the other concern that I have, and it's not just the United States, I'm not a citizen there, what difference does it make to me? But just as a general thing of fairness in Western countries, it's really unfair, I think, on many rural people who drive on roads that are relatively cheap to maintain. So the people that live in New York City, driving on New York City roads, are obviously, those roads are much more congested. There's a lot more wear and tear. Their roads are being somewhat subsidized by people out in the country who are using much less congested roads. When it comes to fairness, that's not really fair. Now, there's a lot of things like that where if you look at the tax code, it's not so much about the rich are paying more or the rich are paying less or whatever. It's about fairness. It's about people that are using the services should be proportionately contributing, and people who earn more maybe should be contributing more. But people in similar income brackets and similar levels of wealth should be, should have a similar tax burden. Same thing really when it comes to roads. People that live in areas where the roads are more expensive should be contributing more than people that live in rural areas where they don't earn as much either.
Shaquille, should more roads and bridges go over to tolls? Therefore, the users will be paying for the roads more closely.
Look, I think so. I think so. You can certainly put some sort of subsidy in there, but look, instead of subsidizing it, why not allow?
Why subsidize it? Let the users pay for it.
Well, you have to do it in a reasonable way. So you wouldn't want to see a corporation come over, take over a major road, and then have $30 tolls, for example. If from where I live 45 minutes away. Well, I don't live here, but where I'm staying, 45 minutes away from Sydney City. If I want to go slightly over to what's called Pyrmont Bay, if I want to go there and back, it's going to be about $70 in tolls. Right. $70 in tolls.
Okay.
That's not something that I think would be good for the United States. If you go to California, when I was traveling through San Francisco, there was a toll bridge there. It was $1. So that's what I'm saying. I think that you can.
No, I understand that, but when you take away the tolls,
let me finish. I think the government can subsidize it not by direct subsidies to the user, but by saying that there's going to be much quicker tax write-offs for the companies in order to make sure that they keep their prices low.
Hey, Lee,
Shaquille, when we're saying the government's to subsidize, that means those people who are not using the bridges and the roads should pay for those or subsidize those who are. That's what you mean.
Hold on a second.
No, that's not what I mean, Lee.
But that's how it works.
No, that's what I just said. You could have a subsidy in the way off, allowing those companies to write stuff off on tax quicker. So what I mean by that is, if you build a road or any other type of infrastructure and you say to a company, you can amortize that over 30 years, that's totally different to saying you can amortize that immediately. Okay, so
no, I get that. I get that.
You could do that with the requirement that they keep the costs to the user low. That doesn't hit the taxpayer. Okay, so it's not the government having to find money to spend. It's the government saying, you go and spend the money on our infrastructure and we won't tax you at a high rate. We'll allow you to recover your money and then make a modest profit. That would be a way of doing this that I think is far more efficient. Now, having said all of that, there's no way in hell that what I've said is ever going to happen in the United States. But
I'm not aware of in the United States private industry building roads. It's always the government who contracts it out.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you go to Beverly Hills, right? Where I was in Beverly Hills last time, the roads around California, much like the road from New York City up to Long Island, they're terrible. Okay, and then as soon as you enter, there's an intersection that I go through, and as soon as you cross that intersection, hit Beverly Hills, the roads are gorgeous. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, but part of that is but you killed part of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, you and Steve and everything. But as I understand it, certain roads in the United States are definitely federal, like the highways and things of that nature, and some of the roads are actually
Turnpikes.
governed by state and local governments and things in that space. So as I recall the way that roads work, and if I'm wrong, please do correct me because I'm
I don't know about federal, but I know we have a thing called turnpikes,
like
which are toll
Yeah,
roads.
toll
And
roads. I mean, the way we fund, and I want to go back, we're going to get into some other issues. We want to talk about the gun tragedies. But the bottom line is that the way we fund transportation in America is the gas tax. So I think Lee hit it on the nail. As we go more fuel efficient, as we have more electrical vehicles, if we're not able to replenish the revenue, the other thing we often don't talk about is, let's say we're doing a lot of light rail and commuter rail. Well, the good thing about transit is it takes people off the road, but then there's less people driving on the road. Hence, you have less gas tax. So they're looking at different funding formulas. One could be vehicles mile travel. Some states, they put something on your car and they tax the people who travel the most, pay them more on gas tax versus others. Now, I don't know how they do it in Australia, Shaquille. I don't know how other countries do it, but that's one good thing we should talk on World Edition is how do other countries fund their transportation?
no, definitely I can see that, and I love to hear.
In relation to what you've just said, I know that California has talked about because obviously California took up the Teslas and which was the leader in electric cars first. That they were very popular in California, so they've been talking about that. There has been some conversation about that here in Australia because of again the fuel taxes that you're missing out on. The thing is that, to be fair, you could, yes, do that with measuring the mileage. That's one way of doing it. That seems reasonable. But on the other hand, why not tax the recharge off the electric battery? You could do that instead of taxing mileage. What would be the difference essentially? But I think that the more important point is, if you've got taxes that are inefficient, then fix the tax system. I mean, rather than trying to replace a fuel tax or a gas tax, as you're calling it, with another type of tax on that activity, why not just create a tax system that's going to be a little bit more indirect? So you've got, like I've talked about before, a proportional or a progressive consumption tax. I think that's the best way of moving forward, similar to what the UK non-dom tax system would operate like. So I think that would be a good way of fixing the income tax situation. Sort out your corporate taxes at 20-21%. That seems reasonable. And then you can put taxes on specific types of activities. So you're going to want to put taxes on alcohol and cigarettes. Most countries do that. You're going to want to put taxes on motor vehicles and the mileage that they go or the energy that they consume, whether that be oil, electric, or hydrogen, or whatever it is. You can do all of that. But I don't think that you look at a tax and go, that isn't very efficient, so let's find another inefficient tax to put on that. That doesn't make any sense.
But speaking of inefficiencies, and this is actually a question I had for Steve, but one of the things that I know that happens, and I am a non-driver, I definitely admit that, get around a lot on mass transit and all in that kind of way. But that being said, some of my friends, including my brother that are drivers and other folks, they will tell you that one of the things that they don't like is, a lot of times these tolls are, for lack of a better term, they're almost like hitting tolls. Like, they might have a certain speed limit. And if you are speeding past that speed limit and you don't know that you are speeding at whatever that limit is, then you get slapped with these lovely little, things in the mail because they have ways to reach in you and all of that. And you find out that you sped through. I think there's one in Cary, which is an area in North Carolina and everything. And, they'll send you a nice little note saying that you sped through there and that you need to pay this and appear on the court and all in that space. So there's got to be a way, and there probably is, to let people know what is going on, because that's what I consider like almost a hitting toll if there's no adequate signage about what the speed limit is, and then you find out later that you have sped through that area. And it's not just a North Carolina thing. I've heard this from people in other states as well. So there's got to be some way not to have these hidden speed traps.
Mark, I know what you're trying to ask, but that's not really a toll, is it? That's government basically handing out speeding fines, essentially, is what you're saying.
Right.
And the government's being sloppy about their signage, so it's revenue raising. Everybody has to put up with that, unfortunately, around the world. People say that this is revenue raising, but again, that's where you have to hold government to account and say, why are you doing this?
Right.
You can't, to me, and this is why I think that people think that I'm conservative sometimes, I think I'm liberal others. The issue that I have is if you know that a problem has been caused by government, why would you go back to government to try and fix the problem, right? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you're dating a girl who treats you terribly, you break up with the girl, right? Now, when you get your new girlfriend, you don't go back to your ex-girlfriend and say, my new girlfriend's treating me terribly. You either work out whether it's your fault or you leave that girl as well and you find one that works. So you don't just keep going back to the same one and go, well, right? That doesn't make sense.
Shaquille, I'm glad you put it that way. Shaquille, I'm glad you put it that way because that was the other issue I was trying to get to. Because there's another part of the world that is been kind of another thing that happens in the United States. I think it happens in other parts, including like Canada and definitely there in Australia. But here in the U.S., and we definitely saw it during the pandemic. The whole notion of housing prices became very interesting. So over a third of Americans, roughly 44 million households, rent homes. And that's according to the White House. So the White House yesterday being Wednesday, came up with a lovely new plan because they have announced that they're going to come up with this plan to protect renters and help curb rental costs. So they're definitely saying that is a problem, the rental costs and everything. So they are putting some things in place in their blueprint for a renter's Bill of Rights. So the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example, will collect information to identify practices that unfairly prevent applicants and tenants from accessing or staying in housing, such as the use of tenant background checks. And the Department of Justice is also now going to examine anti-competitive information sharing within rental markets. And they're also saying the Federal Housing Finance Agency and the Department of Housing and Urban Development will also take part. So that's just some of the things that they're looking at doing. And this seems to be another case of the government trying to fix a problem that in a lot of ways, to your point, Shaquille, they helped create. So I'm wondering y'all's thoughts about this because it is a major problem. I know I've dealt with rental issues. Other people have dealt with rental issues that are in the circles of mine and everything. But now they're saying that they've come up with the great idea of fixing the problem themselves, and we all know, as you have put it,
let me just address this housing issue, okay? Because I think this is an important thing. Where I had a crack at you a couple of weeks ago when you told me about the Occupy movement, and I said, you want to attack us finance guys, and then I accused you of going, this bloke goes half cocked into this, Occupy Durham thing, and you said that one of the things you achieved was they built more low cost housing. Let's address this, okay? People can't have it both ways. People want to have it both ways, but they can't. So let's take Canada, for example, okay? Obviously, the area that I'm most familiar with is Vancouver. Now, Vancouver, property prices are through the roof. As I understand it, it's the same way all throughout Canada, but Vancouver is through the roof, and I'm aware of that. I've seen that. Mm-hmm. So the government wants to step in and say, well, look, we will do something to depress the prices or to keep the prices low artificially. What we're going to do is we're going to dampen demand. How are we going to do that? We're going to put restrictions on international investors buying properties. Australia is now talking about doing the same thing, okay? In the United States, they're probably not going to go down that path, but then they're going to have all these other rules. You can't have it both ways, though. Canada has become enormously more wealthy than what it was because of a massive influx of investment money, predominantly from Chinese investors, okay, that have gone in and bought up the real estate market. Australia, the everyday Australian is substantially better off, and there's more money floating around the Australian economy because of international investors into our real estate markets, predominantly from China. It's a big market. You've got 1.7, 1.8 billion people that live in China. Americans aren't coming over here and buying our properties. Okay, or not enough to drive up our property prices. So when you say you want low-cost housing, that's fine. But remember that in order to achieve that, you've got to actually depress the price of housing, which means you've got less money in your economy. The asset base of the country is worth less. So is that the way to achieve it? The other thing is that you can build low-cost housing, but nobody wants to live in them. Okay, like people complain in America that everyone wants to live in a mansion, the same as it is in Australia. Everybody wants a 4 or 5 bedroom house. You can't have it both ways.
I'm glad you said that because one of the things that I heard about, and this is actually to Steve and you and everything, but one of the houses, I've heard people talking about tiny houses. I've also heard recently, because one of the other articles I read yesterday was this notion of a 3D house, and it's actually a house that apparently is made of recyclable material on like a 3D printer or something like that. It's a large printer and all in that space. But a lot of folks are, when I talk to them, and you mention it to friends or acquaintances or just people that you see on the street and everything, they even though it's a convenient house and it's an affordable house, they don't think that the house is as appealing as they would like it.
No, exactly. But that's my point. That's exactly my point. This is the same thing that you have with education. You got the young kids in America, and I totally understand where they're coming from. Saying, look, I want to go to university. I've managed to get a spot at Harvard, but I'm going to end up finishing my degree with $300,000 in debt. Now, there are cheaper options such as community universities and community colleges, but they don't want to do that. They want to be able to go to the big Ivy League universities. They just don't want to pay what the market will bear. So then you ask for government to intervene into that market. Well, every time government intervenes, you get results that you're not happy with. And then what do? Same as I said before, you go back to your ex-girlfriend, you go back to government, you say, hey, look, you intervened and made it worse. How about we get you to intervene again? Government is always the problem.
Well, that's the thing. And Steve, and I'm telling this back to you and everything, but they said this whole blueprint that they came up with, I just put some of the things, is quote unquote not binding and does not constitute a government policy, but the administration is meant to encourage the creation of policies that will promote fair housing. So one, why are you creating something that's not really a policy?
I wasn't prepared to talk about it. I'm going to open up with affordable housing possibly tomorrow or next week, but this is a major issue. Before we go, I'm going to talk about it for a few minutes, but before we do that, because it's a really important issue, many people are talking about it at city governments. I know we're talking about it in Morrisville, Durham's making investments in affordable housing, Raleigh, Apex. I just was at a presentation this morning. Cary's investing $9 million. There's definitely a housing crisis in America, but I think the question becomes, how do you define affordable housing? What is the purpose of affordable housing? And the name has actually changed to workforce housing in North Carolina. But real quickly, let's get an update from Sasha Starr on Ukraine and the corruption scandal, and just a quick update on the war, and then we'll come back to that issue.
Thank you, Steve. The corruption scandal, it took a lot of space in the information field, and I must tell you that I'm very satisfied the way it was handled by Ukrainian authorities. There was indeed, from what we know, one official made a profit of $400,000 on a food supply to the army. So obviously he couldn't do it alone. There were other people involved. He needed many things to get that accomplished. So he was caught, and now they are going to implicate all people who directly or indirectly participated in that scam. And hopefully, because it's a wartime, hopefully there will be very heavy penalties waged on that people, maybe even death executions. That's on one hand, it's a very negative for Ukrainian image, because there are people involved in corruption scams. On the other hand, we should be aware that in any country in the world, there are very similar horrendous cases when the public trust has been violated. And especially in Ukraine, it's a very sensitive situation because it's a wartime there, and because Ukraine is getting help from international community. So to disclose this information and to punish culprits is a very important thing for Ukraine to do. And it seems to me that's exactly what Ukrainian government is doing.
Thank you, Sasha.
Sasha, do you think the American government led to this, not in terms of lack of accountability for the funds that we send over there?
You know, it's kind of a nice way to say it, accountability or so on. In a country which is under bombardment every single day, when basically until a very long time, it was a game of survival, not to do anything, because only lately, when some meaningful weapons started actually to come to Ukraine, and Ukraine is now planning offensive in the next, I'd say, couple of months probably. Now it's a little bit of a game changer. Now the recent decision to provide all specter of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine, and yesterday was announcement that finally the tanks of calibers Abrams and Leopard 2, they are going to get to Ukraine. It's a game changer. Now, let's take a longer perspective. The war will be over sooner or later, one way or another. We know all that. And what's happened with Ukraine once war is over? Now, Ukraine, with all the weapons coming from the West, it's becoming the modern, well-equipped, and I would say the strongest army in Europe. And naturally, it will be joining NATO. And basically, it will be the strongest NATO country in Europe and second strongest in the world.
Because of the weapons we're giving them?
Not only weapons, it's also training that West is providing, that
Right.
Ukraine can fight a modern war, fight successfully against such enemy as Russia. And Russia was until recently considered the second strongest army in the world. And look at what Ukraine is doing. So in a way, when Ukraine will start to be rebuilt, all new a system of economics, ethics, businesses, all will be modernized. And Ukraine, in order to be successful, has to go through complete modernization of its economics, society, culture, everything. So this is a way to do it, especially when the corruption is still there. And once it's been exposed, immediately fix it, punish the culprits, and continue to develop its society.
Changing ethics is not so easy. We saw that in Afghanistan. As soon as we left, it went back to the way it was.
It's not. But remember the cases, for example, East Germany, it was a socialist country. It was joined the Federal Republic of Germany. And today, well, many years passed, but you have to start somewhere. So the Federal Republic of Germany could take approach, we don't need the socialist people, let them do whatever they want. They took different approach. They got them in. It took substantial time, but even today, when you are traveling in Germany, if you are going to a territory what used to be East Germany, it looks somewhat different. They have this massive several stories buildings which were built on typical Soviet design. So it will still remain there for some time, but eventually the East Germany successfully joined West Germany. It became one country, one people, and they're still developing. I'm not saying that everything was just fixed overnight. No, but it's a process. So same as with Ukraine, it's a process. And Ukraine, let me tell you, there's an example, right, that I went through myself in the 90s. I had a business in Poland, and I traveled a lot in Poland, and also to Ukraine a few times. Russia is a different story. I'll tell you why. So right after the fall of Soviet Union, Ukraine was the richest and the most developed the republic of all 15 republics of Soviet Union. It was much richer and much better developed than Poland. It was bigger country than Poland. It had more people than Poland. So Poland was way far behind Ukraine. However, Poland went through a shock therapy. It joined European Union. It joined NATO. And where Poland is today? It's a prosperous country with very little corruption, with very, very good ethics, working ethics, business ethics, good education system, medical system. And you may disagree with some of their policies. One of them is stating that Poland is for Poles. So they don't allow any immigration to Poland. However, at the same time, they accepted 3.5 million Ukrainians. It's their business. They're not reporting to anybody. Although they're a member of the European Union and NATO, but they say that what's happening in Poland is responsibility of Poland only. And Poland will not allow anybody in the world to dictate what them to do, especially in terms of immigration policy. Ukraine, on the other hand, they kept close ties with Russia. So they didn't go through the shock therapy. They went through the same system of oligarchs like in Russia, and so on. So by the time around 2013, there was a mandate to president of Ukraine at that time, Yanukovych, who was basically a Russian supported figure. The mandate was to have an application to European Union, have an application to NATO, and modernize the country. That's what Ukrainians wanted. And Yanukovych, who made a deal with Putin, he started to sabotage that, and he withdrew actually the initial application to European Union, and that led to uprising and so-called Maidan in Ukraine. And you know what's happened after that. There was a new election in Ukraine, and Poroshenko was elected president. Russia was furious and annexed Crimea and started all this business in Donbass region. We know what's happened after that. So Ukraine is now have a clear mandate with the President Zelensky, who got 73% of the Ukrainian votes. The mandate is to modernize country, join European Union, join NATO, become part of the West. And this is a huge blow to Putin and Russia. And from our perspectives, from the interests of the West, the weaker Russia is, the better, simply because it's a single threat for last 3 generations to destroy the world over with thermonuclear arms. So it's in our interest to deal with that once and for all. And United States and the West, they are not losing even single soldier. There are no fighters from the West and United States there. Everything is done by Ukrainians, very brave people, great fighters, and all they need is technical and financial help from the West.
Sasha,
and finally, it's getting there.
we thank you so much for this insight. We're going to close out on affordable housing, but real quickly, let's shift the gears. It's always good as I steer the plane to get into a little political turbulence. But you know, George Santos, the word Santos has now become a verb. It's almost like the movie Liar Liar, where you can't tell the movie where he couldn't tell the truth. He couldn't tell. All he could do was a lie. I mean, guys, regardless of whether he's a Republican or Democrat, is someone fit to serve in Congress if they keep lying?
Wait.
Steve, there's a long history of politicians lying.
What about Biden's lies? What about Biden's?
It's not like this. I mean, come on. It has nothing to do with him being a Republican. He's not fit to serve in the Congress. I mean, he lied about his mother. Okay, yeah, Biden has lied. We all lie. All politicians lie.
But you've got a guy who had a stroke, who can't even speak properly, right? Who wasn't even able to read off his teleprompter properly. I don't hear you saying, is he fit to serve in the Senate? unless you want to try and tell me the House of Representatives is more important.
John Fetterman. Yeah, but okay, guys. Okay, let's put this in perspective. He said that his mother died in 9/11 and they found his mother was in another country. He said that he was, I mean, every single thing he has said.
Steve, you're right. Problem is, what standard do we hold him to?
One thing, I'm defending, okay, look, this is not an anti-Republican statement at all.
No, I understand that.
I'm saying that this guy needs to resign or he needs to be just, I mean, come on.
Just Steve, based on what standard?
Let me do it for you because it's not my country, right? Not my monkey, not my circus. So let me do it for you, okay?
Look, Dan Worthington
Before you call for his resignation, this is squarely on the Republicans, actually, because they primaried him, they put him in there, they said to the electorate, "Hey, have we got a guy for you?" Right? And people voted for him.
But look, I'm going to put Dan Worthington on the spot in a good way because he's a man of integrity. He's a Republican.
And we're not secure.
Dan Worthington served in the military. Dan, come on. Don't you think Kevin McCarthy should ask this guy to step down? I mean, regardless of whether he's Dan Worthington, you're an honest man.
Does McCarthy or the other Republican even have the power to push him out?
No, he doesn't.
No, hold on a second. Kevin McCarthy does have power because he's already pushed out 2 Democrats. And
You
that
can
was
ask him to leave. Step down.
Committee assignment. All right, so here's the deal. Biden should resign from the presidency.
You want Kamala Harris in charge?
Because he's a freaking
There
liar.
you go.
I know it.
I'm meeting her on Monday, maybe.
There isn't a day that Biden doesn't go by and say some lie or fabrication, or he plagiarizes, or he's snipping a skirt or a hair or something. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that Biden doesn't do something like that. So if I think that Biden should step down, I think that Santos should follow him, and then followed by Schiff, I mean, and Pelosi, and whatever that other idiot's name is, the one that was dating the Chinese chick that was actually bi.
Yeah, but isn't he still involved with
Yeah.
something like
No, they made it so he couldn't have. He said he can't sit on the committee, but he should resign. He should have resigned then. Shit should have resigned because he's the biggest liar that's ever been in the House of Representatives. I mean, he has absolutely no credibility anymore, and yet he still continues to spout his rhetoric and vileness and these lies. And I think he's a psychopath because I think he actually believes it now. So we got Santos, who's drag queen crossdresser, married to a woman, but says he was engaged to a man. Running in New York. New York's so screwed up anyway. I think New York got what they deserved, frankly. I mean, if they're going to elect somebody like that, I mean, they knew all the things he was claiming he actually did do.
Dan, don't forget, he's Catholic, but he's Jew-ish.
Catholic-ish, Jew-ish.
Catholic,
Yeah.
Jewish, he's one of the two and everything.
Yeah.
But Dan, I do have to ask you a quick question,
All
and that's
things
about
to all
the.
people. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you want to really win elections in this day and age, you've got to be the whole spectrum, or at least claim to be the whole spectrum. So isn't Santos really the answer to the?
Honestly,
to the
I beg to differ on that though, because I know that that's what we're seeing politicians do, and politicians will say things to suit the audience all the time. And look, I disagree with Mark on all sorts of different issues because we're not actually that far apart in our politics, but on some things we are.
Yeah.
I say what I mean. I've never been shy. I say exactly what I mean, what I think, and people will sometimes gravitate towards that and say that's fantastic. Other people will criticize me, send me emails saying, Shaquille, you're being really horrible, blah, blah, blah. That's fine, okay? I'm going to say what I stand for. I actually wish politicians to do that. Tell us where you stand. Tell us what you're about. We can then choose. We don't agree with you, or we do, right? Or we agree with some parts, and we don't agree with other parts. I'd like there to be a little bit more authenticity. I think that's what most people want.
And I think that's what most people want. I think most of the politicians I talk to, that's what they want.
I suggest
the
that of all the people here, we need to have the most inauthentic person run for politics. Nick, over to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
here.
right.
I'm here.
Guys,
I'm here, but I don't do
I
politics.
think Nick's the guy. Yeah.
Guys,
I
is
don't do
important.
politics.
Real quickly,
You don't
I
do
need to share
politics,
with-
hey, really
No.
quickly, and then I was going to toss it back to Steve.
Yeah,
Dan, one
because I
question
have-
I had
That's
to
what
ask you
Steve
really
does.
quickly
Steve
was,
does politics.
Should resign.
doesn't politics make strange bedfellows, though, and everything? Because one of the things I was going to ask you, Dan, is I know that one of the other people that they were targeting, and apparently she's got some Republican allies, which I actually find kind of funny and almost hilarious, is the Muslim lady out of Michigan, because apparently there was some folks that they might go after
Talib?
Ms. Omar and everything, and now she said that she's been talking to some of her Republican colleagues and friends and have got them to actually back and support her and all in that space to protect her.
I don't
and
understand. I don't understand why anybody would support her. As I've said on the show previously, half my family are Muslim. All of my family, or essentially all of my family, have immigrated from Fiji to either the United States, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. Okay, we've got some that live in the UK and in Germany. But the idea that you would come as a refugee to the United States at whatever she was, 9 or 10 years old, and then get there and just bag the United States, and that's all she's done. I can't think of a single positive thing that anyone has ever said about the United States, and I don't get it. I don't understand. Okay, there are countries that I don't feel very positive about. Okay, I won't go to those countries. Generally speaking, you'll hear me talk about an individual politician. I won't bag an entire country, but there are some countries I don't have anything positive to say about, and I won't go there. I won't go to those countries. So why would you go to a country that has provided you with every opportunity that you could possibly have dreamt of from where you came from, and then just tear that country to shreds, and you've got nothing positive to say? I think
Shaquille, I have some shocking news for you.
and I don't understand why Americans find that is so that they're so enamored by that they're going to vote for it.
Well, they're
No,
not.
Shaquille, but I have some shocking news for you, because when I talked to Miss Kim, and like I said, I learned, and it's eye-opening when you talk to people of different parties and everything of that nature. But one of the things that she mentioned, which I had not realized, and maybe Steve has some thoughts about this, but the biggest issue with immigration hasn't been what we thought it was. It is maybe this year or the next couple of years. It's not the folks coming over from Mexico and some of those places, the quote-unquote illegal immigrants, but the biggest issue for a number of years was actually the extended overstays of visas. That's actually what she pointed out to me, and I've looked at the statistics. It's actually
That's true.
There are a
That's
lot
true.
of extended overstays.
Yes, but Mark, people that are coming in from Western countries, right? Australians, British, etc., that come in and overstay, they're generally not going to overstay for 20 years. Okay, they're going to overstay for a bit. They're probably going to breach their visa conditions, get a job on the side, that sort of stuff, because they're 22 years old and they think they're going to live forever and the rules don't apply to them. Okay, Americans do that in Australia all the time. There's a big difference between that and having 4-5 million people come across your border. And again, if you want to have that kind of immigration, if you want to say, hey, look, America's open, all immigrants come in, then make sure you're actually allowing all immigrants to come in. It's not fair to the people that are displaced in India or displaced in Syria or displaced in Ukraine or wherever else they're coming from, that are trying to get into the United States, that find that their applications are being pushed back because people have jumped in front of them. That's not fair on them. So be fair about it. Give everybody a reasonable and equal chance to get into your country. Don't just say, if you have the ability to get into a South American country, come up to Mexico and walk across the border, you know what? We'll let you jump in front of everybody else. Yeah,
Right.
and then try to tell the rest of it that's fairness and we should support it. I mean, that's
But see, immigration is an issue that should actually be discussed by Congress. The national debt and deficit issues that should be discussed by Congress. You know what they were discussing? Ticketmaster. And that's stupid. That has nothing to do with the national agenda. It's people that are overpaying for Taylor Swift. Who cares about that? The real problem we have in the United States is how the agenda is set and what is being discussed. Immigration should be
I think
discussed.
that's solely, and I know that you agree with me on this, Nick, that is solely the media's fault. The fact that the debt levels are where they are, the deficit is where it is, that should be the leading story every single day.
It should be the leading story every time. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the United States is going to be economically bankrupt in the next couple of years. and that
Okay,
should be the
guys.
leading story.
Money.
And it's not. Instead, it's Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster.
We're not to get
That
salty.
is not a leading
We're going to
story.
come back tomorrow or Friday and talk about affordable housing because I do want to dedicate part of the show to that. Tomorrow is India Republic Day, so I'm going to be sending an email this afternoon to
Well,
get a
please,
guest
please,
in.
please don't forget Australia because it's
It's also
now
Australia Day, India Republic Day, January 50th,
It's Australia Day.
1950, when India adopted its constitution. I'm going to end today with, unfortunately, this is the time when I'm a moderator, but I just got texted to Facebook, so I'm not going to be able to not talk about this anymore. But we recently had a political scandal going on in North Carolina where the state auditor, Beth Wood, who's a friend of mine, I know her, she serves on the Council of State, was in a hit and run accident. Now, initially, this was reported it was a hit and run, but what they found out is that her car was on top of another car, completely demolished the another car. She had a state license plate, and she fled the scene of this crime. This act occurred on December 8th, and 4 weeks later, the press reported it. And now it's coming out that videos are coming that, she went back into the party where she was at. It's just crazy. Wow. This thing has really skyrocketed now. She's been a very good state auditor. She's been very effective, the only Democrat that consistently wins in an increasingly red state. A lot of Republican supporters. And, some people think she's politically destroyed. I hope that she comes forward with the story. I think the lesson learned is that it wasn't handled the right way. If she had reported to the authorities, even if she had been drinking and over the limit, at least she could have been upfront about it rather than now. But I hope she's going to be okay through the scandal. I know, Nick, you're reading this in the paper. I'm listening to Gabrielle every 5 minutes on our Nation News Networks. It's like Sonny Corleone in The Causeway. The media just keep coming up with the machine gun. And at this point, she's got so many holes in her that, I just don't know whether she – do you all think she can recover from this?
No,
she shouldn't.
No, she's toast. Okay, come on. She's been a government employee for years. It's time. And this is the problem you have with your Democratic Party, Steve. It's time to let the younger generation take over. Let some younger people in.
The younger generation
they hog all the bloody money.
Well, why do you want to let the younger generation take over? They've just been indoctrinated into this left-wing lunacy. So that's the reason why you want them there.
What's the left-wing
they're not capable of
doing
with a reasonable, rational thought for themselves. Steve, I'll say to you, we've seen politicians get away with a lot worse. Raphael Warnock, for example. Raphael Warnock has been – there's a YouTube video where the police have gone there. His wife has said, look, he's been hitting me. He's been doing this and that, blah, blah, etc. He survived it. Okay, he survived it. He won 2 elections.
Okay,
so I don't see why her career is
I'm going to espouse a little political humor today. I had too much espresso in my coffee, but maybe she'd be a good candidate for Congress or to run on the ticket with Donald Trump.
No. Yeah, right. She should be a good Republican. That's not a problem. I mean, but she doesn't make a good Democrat.
Republican.
Hey, Steve, she should change affiliations. Become a Republican. She'll fit right in.
The Republicans
maybe she can be just like Pence and Biden and the rest of the folks that have these documents in their house. Because apparently that's what everybody's doing, is hiding documents in their house. So maybe she can be like both Pence and Biden and hide the documents in her house that are the evidence of her good behavior.
There we go.
Who knows?
Wasn't there a Kennedy years ago parked his car in the lake with somebody in it?
Ted Kennedy, he killed somebody in a lake, and he walked.
Yeah, so again, you really think that Republicans can get away with that? At any time in the last 100 years.
Definitely. Look at Donald Trump. Come on. Look at your friend Donald Trump. He gets away with stuff like that all the time.
It's time to wrap up, so Nick, we got to get ready to pull off and let Steve have the closing words.
Over the last year, after the last few years, and how many of us have been accustomed to a virtual world where my feet are up on my desk, I'm doing Zoom call after Zoom call. Lately, what I found out is that I'm eliminating my Zoom accounts and I'm getting back to in-person meetings. Yesterday was a big day for me. I had my first day where I had in-person meetings from 8 in the morning all the way up until the evening, and then a city council meeting. I got to tell you, I was tired, but the energy I felt was like I hadn't felt in years. Being in real time, seeing people, it got me thinking maybe the virtual realities that we live in are important, but we don't want to get too addicted to the virtual technologies where we're not interacting with each other. I felt literally physically better. Of course, I had exercised at lunch, but I felt better that was getting the energy off of other people. So I wonder, when are we going to start getting back to what I would say is the absolute normal, which is return to in-person meetings, do Zoom and Teams meetings only if you have to, but let's get back to getting in the office, doing things. This whole experience has made me now actually decide that I want to go back to work in an office. I want to start leaving my house for at least 4 to 5 hours and getting back to the habit of doing emails and writing in the morning and in the evening and the late afternoons, and using that block between 10 and 4 to sit down and meet people. What I'm finding in my own career in sales and business development and governmental relations is that I'm finding I'm making more progress because those initial meetings, I'm building relationships and following up and just simply able to connect and build better rapport than on a Zoom screen. Anyway, this is something we can talk about as we're living in a hybrid world, but I think we need to figure out how do we get back to meeting in person and having discussions over a cup of coffee, whether it's political, business, or whatever. From our family to yours, we wish you all the best on Roku and Pod TV, and we'll be back tomorrow for another edition. Thank you all. Be safe wherever you are.